The village of Umuna had never witnessed such chaos. What began as an ordinary Sunday service erupted into the scandal that would echo through generations. Father Anthony stood tall at the altar, his sermon flowing like honey, when suddenly the ancient wooden doors of the church flew open with a thunderous bang. The elders of Umuna marched in, faces tight with rage, walking sticks pounding against the floor, leading a procession that made the congregation gasp in disbelief. 85 women, all with swollen bellies, all pointing at the same man, the handsome young priest everyone had trusted. "Father Anthony has betrayed our daughters, our sisters, our wives," the chief elder's voice boomed across the stunned congregation. "Look at the evidence of his sin." Only months before, this same Father Anthony had arrived in Umuna like a blessing from above. At just 25, he was the youngest priest ever ordained to serve their parish. The church that once struggled to fill its pews now overflowed every Sunday. His powerful sermons, his kindness, his striking good looks, he seemed perfect in every way. But as our ancestors warn, what glitters by day may bring darkness by night. How did a devoted servant of God transform into a man who would plant his seed across an entire village? And the most shocking part of this tale? The reason behind his actions will leave you questioning everything you believe about temptation, power, and human weakness. In the heart of eastern Nigeria, where ancestral shrines once stood tall, the village of Umuna had embraced the new faith like a second skin. Their red earth roads, lined with mango trees and cassava farms, led to a modest church that had stood for generations. The villagers of Umuna were known throughout the land for their strict adherence to tradition. Respect for elders was paramount, community values sacred, and the line between right and wrong as clear as the distinction between night and day. Father Anthony was born not of privilege, but of passion. His father, a simple palm wine tapper, and his mother, a market woman selling akara, had sacrificed everything for their brilliant son. From childhood, young Anthony displayed extraordinary wisdom beyond his years. While other boys chased after footballs in dusty fields, Anthony sat under the mango tree behind the church, absorbing religious texts like parched soil drinks rainwater. The bishop himself noticed the young man during a rare visit to Umuna. "This one," he declared, pointing at Anthony, "has been touched by divine purpose." The entire diocese watched in amazement as Anthony completed seminary training in record time, mastering theological studies that challenged even the oldest priests. At just 25 years old, an age when most young men were still searching for their path, Father Anthony knelt before the bishop, receiving his holy orders in a ceremony that drew crowds from 7 neighboring villages. Women ululated, men beat drums, and children scattered palm fronds along his path. Never had Umuna produced such a celebrated son of the church. Upon his return as their appointed parish priest, Father Anthony attacked his duties with the ferocity of a hunter chasing prey. Dawn found him preparing the church. Midnight caught him still counseling troubled souls. His homilies wove traditional proverbs with biblical wisdom so seamlessly that even the oldest village skeptics nodded in approval. The transformation was swift and powerful. Where once 20 faithful attended Sunday Mass, now 300 squeezed onto wooden benches. The church coffers that had gathered dust now overflowed with generous offerings. Baptisms increased tenfold. Even the youths who had abandoned village life for city temptations began returning on Sundays, drawn by Father Anthony's magnetic sermons on finding purpose. Umuna began to prosper in ways previously unimaginable. But as our ancestors warn, when a tree grows too quickly toward the sky, one must question the nature of what feeds its roots. As Father Anthony's reputation spread across Umuna like wildfire in Harmattan, something shifted in the hearts of the villagers. The respect they held for their young priest began to transform into something more complicated, more dangerous, especially among the women. After Sunday services, crowds would linger for hours just to receive his blessing. But notice, my friends, how the women would arrange their wrappers more carefully on those days. How they applied shea butter until their skin glistened like morning dew. Young girls who had never shown interest in church affairs suddenly became devoted attendees, sitting in the front rows with eager eyes fixed upon their handsome spiritual leader. Soon, the pastor's quarters became a marketplace of gifts. Monday brought pounded yam and a goosey soup from Mama Chioma. Tuesday, it was jollof rice and plantain from the widow in Kichi. Wednesday through Sunday, different dishes arrived at his doorstep, each woman hoping her cooking would be the one to capture his special attention. Father Anthony, who had once been a humble servant of God, began walking differently. His shoulders straightened, his chin lifted higher. The power of admiration is a subtle poison, and he drank it daily. When women touched his hand longer than necessary during communion, he no longer pulled away. When they complimented his physical strength rather than his spiritual wisdom, he smiled instead of redirecting the conversation. The village elders should have noticed when Adama's daughter began visiting the church compound at dusk, claiming she needed spiritual counseling. They should have questioned why Rebecca, married for 15 years, suddenly spent every market day cleaning the rectory instead of selling her vegetables. They should have wondered why Father Anthony's evening walks now included stops at the river when young women were bathing. But as a frog in warming water feels no danger until it boils, Umana saw no threat in their growing adoration. After all, wasn't he a man of God? Wasn't he above the temptations that plagued ordinary men? The signs were there, written in bold letters that no one bothered to read. The season of heavy rains arrived in Umuna, and with it came fever that swept through the village like a vengeful spirit. Not even Father Anthony, with all his perceived holiness, could escape its clutches. For 3 days he lay on his bed, burning with heat that no cold compress could tame, his powerful frame weakened and vulnerable. Word of the priest's illness spread quickly, and among those who rushed to offer aid was young Martha. Martha, with her doe eyes and clever hands, had watched Father Anthony for months from the church choir, planning her moment with the patience of a leopard stalking prey. She arrived at his quarters as the sun began its descent, carrying a pot of jollof rice, his favorite dish. The compound was empty. Everyone had gone to their farms or to market. Martha wore a wrapper that stopped above her knees and a blouse that revealed more than it concealed. This was no accident, my people. This was strategy. "Father, you must eat to regain your strength," she whispered, sitting at the edge of his bed. She fed him spoonful by spoonful, her fingers occasionally brushing against his lips, her body leaning closer with each movement. Father Anthony's mind became a battlefield. His priestly vows stood on one side, armor gleaming in righteousness. On the other side stood raw desire, a warrior he had never faced before. For years he had preached about temptation without truly understanding its power. "This is wrong," he whispered even as his hand reached for her. "No one will know," Martha replied, her voice honey-sweet with promise. When their bodies finally collided, something fundamental broke inside Father Anthony. The line he crossed that evening would lead him down a path from which Umuna would never recover. The forbidden fruit, once tasted, awakened a hunger that prayer alone could not satisfy. After that fateful evening with Martha, Father Anthony's soul should have been crushed by guilt. Instead, something unexpected bloomed in its place, a dangerous confidence. The priest had tasted sin and found it sweeter than all his years of virtue. Martha became just the beginning. Soon Ruth, a widow whose husband had been taken by the river spirits 2 harvests ago, found reasons to bring cassava and yams to the priest's quarters when evening shadows grew long. Then came Esther, the school teacher who claimed to need help interpreting Bible passages alone in the empty church after the children had gone home. The pattern was established. Each liaison followed an unspoken ritual, the offering of food, the lingering conversation, the accidental touch, and finally surrender to forbidden passion. Father Anthony, once so dedicated to his holy vows, now lived for these secret encounters. In the bright light of day, he remained the respected spiritual leader, delivering powerful sermons about righteousness that made old women weep with emotion. He blessed newborn babies with hands that had explored forbidden flesh the night before. He prayed over marriages while plotting his next conquest. This double life gave him a thrill that no amount of religious devotion ever had. Power flowed through his veins like palm wine. These women came to him willingly, drawn by his position, his charisma, his untouchable status in the community. Who would dare speak against a man of God? Who would believe accusations against their beloved Father Anthony? The web of secrecy spread across Umuna like an invisible net. Married women like Miriam created elaborate tales to explain their absences to suspicious husbands. Young unmarried girls like Deborah risked their reputations and future marriage prospects. Some came seeking blessings they believed only he could bestow. Others came from curiosity, hearing whispers from friends about the priest's hidden talents. What nobody in Umuna understood was how such secrets could remain buried in a village where the walls had ears and the trees had eyes. Yet somehow, the conspiracy of silence held firm. When women passed each other on dusty paths, knowing glances were exchanged but no words spoken. Each believed herself special, chosen, unique in the priest's affections. Father Anthony became two men living in one body, the public saint and the private sinner. And as our ancestors warn, a house divided against itself cannot stand for long. As the moon completed its fourth cycle since Father Anthony's first transgression, strange occurrences began rippling through Umuna village. Women who had always been regular at the monthly women's meeting were suddenly absent. Young girls who once danced with abandon at village gatherings now moved carefully, their hands resting protectively on bellies that seemed fuller than before. The first whisper came from Mama Nkeru, the village midwife whose eyes missed nothing. "Have you noticed," she murmured to her friend at the market, "how many women are missing their monthly visitations? 3 in my compound alone." Like termites working silently within wood, rumors began to eat away at Father Anthony's carefully constructed facade. A husband questioned why his wife seemed nauseous every morning. A father wondered why his daughter suddenly needed looser dresses. At first, these were isolated incidents, easy to dismiss as coincidence. But then came the undeniable evidence. Adana, unmarried and devoted choir member, could no longer hide her swelling belly beneath her church robe. When confronted by her father, she wept bitter tears and named Father Anthony as the responsible party. The next day, Rebecca's husband stormed through the village, shouting that his wife was carrying a child that could not be his, for he had been away working in the city for 6 months. 1 pregnancy could be scandal, 2 could be coincidence. But as the count climbed, 5, then 12, then 20, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Something unprecedented was happening in Umuna. The village chief, his face grave as a funeral drum, called an emergency meeting under the ancient Iroko tree, where matters of gravest importance were always discussed. As men gathered in the outer circle and women in the inner, a terrible accounting began. "Let those who carry life within them step forward," the chief commanded. The collective gasp that followed echoed across the village as women rose, young and old, married and unmarried, widowed and betrothed. Not 2 or 3 as expected, but dozens upon dozens. "Who is responsible?" the chief demanded, though many already suspected the answer. One brave voice, Martha's, broke the heavy silence. "Father Anthony," she said, her voice steady despite her shame. It was Father Anthony. And like a dam breaking, the confessions flooded forth, revealing a truth more shocking than anyone could have imagined. Dawn broke over Umuna with unusual stillness. No birds sang, no children played. The village held its breath as if the very air knew what was coming. Sunday service began as it always had. Father Anthony stood resplendent in his white and gold vestments, his voice strong as he led the opening hymn. The church was packed as usual, but today faces that normally gazed upon him with adoration now held unreadable expressions. None could guess the storm gathering just outside those sacred walls. Midway through his sermon on forgiveness, oh, the bitter irony, the massive wooden doors flew open with such force that the hinges nearly tore from ancient frames. Chief Okonkwo stood in the doorway, flanked by village elders, their staffs striking the ground in unison. Behind them stood a procession that stretched far into the distance. "Father Anthony!" The chief's voice thundered across the stunned congregation. "Your judgment has arrived!" One by one they entered, 85 women, their bellies swollen with unmistakable evidence of his sins. They formed a circle around the altar, a living testimony to his betrayal. Martha, Ruth, Esther, Miriam, Deborah, wives of respected men, daughters of noble families, widows entrusted to the church's care, all carrying his seed. Father Anthony's legs gave way. He collapsed upon the altar steps, vestments pooling around him like spilled holy water. "Is this true?" a voice cried from the congregation. The priest's lips moved, but no sound emerged. Then, barely audible, "They came to me. They wanted. I never meant for this to happen." A terrible silence engulfed the church, broken only by the soft weeping of old women who had dedicated their lives to this sacred place. Then came a sound like thunder. Joshua Okiki, whose wife and 2 daughters stood among the accusers, overturned a pew with a roar of anguish. His action broke the spell. Chaos erupted. Men tore at the church fixtures. Women wailed curses upon the priest who had defiled their daughters. Youths ripped down the holy images, smashing the imported stained glass that had been their village pride. "Burn it!" someone shouted. "Cleanse this place with fire!" Flames leapt hungrily at the wooden beams as Father Anthony was dragged outside. The church that had stood for generations became a pyre, a funeral for Umuna's lost innocence and shattered faith. Through billowing smoke, villagers watched their spiritual center collapse into ash and ember. The sacred had become profane. The shepherd had devoured his flock. As smoke still rose from the church ruins, police vehicles arrived from the neighboring town. Father Anthony, once exalted as a divine gift to Umuna, departed in handcuffs, head bowed, vestments torn, a fallen man. The diocese disowned him immediately. The courts showed no mercy. 20 years imprisonment became his sentence, though no jail term could repair what had been broken in Umuna. The village that once stood proud now carried a shame that clung like persistent fog. Families fractured as husbands rejected wives who had betrayed them. Others accepted the unborn children, choosing forgiveness over bitterness. When the babies arrived, 83 in total, with 2 lost to miscarriage, they bore an uncanny resemblance to their father, a constant reminder of collective blindness. No new church was built upon the ashes. The land was declared cursed by some, sacred by others, but all agreed it should remain untouched as testament to what happens when power corrupts and community vigilance falters. This tale, my people, carries warnings our ancestors have whispered for generations. A person is not what they claim to be, but what their actions reveal. Sacred clothing cannot mask an unholy heart. A community that elevates one person too high loses sight of human frailty. Now, my dear listeners, if I may ask, have you ever heard of priests engaging in this type of secret affairs with women in the parish? Or as a woman, has a priest approached you before? What did you do? Also, who is to blame for what happened? Is it the women who forgot that Father Anthony was a priest, but rather got carried away by his handsomeness, offering their bodies to him? Or should Father Anthony himself be blamed for not saying no to the temptations that these women brought his way? Let me get your answers in the comments section, my people. My people, remember Umuna when someone stands before you claiming perfection. Remember that even the tallest Iroko tree can harbor rot within its core. If you found this story interesting and an eye-opener, please share it to the people around you. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories such as this. Also, hit the notification bell to get notified when the next amazing video drops. Thank you very much, my people. I will see you next time. Bye for now.